And I am Tamara Scott. Thank you for staying tuned with us this very cold, chilly day in February in Iowa. A brisk walk to the Capitol this morning at 7 a.m. I think it was 2 below, somebody said. Wind chill, I have no idea. It was cold. We're talking about Valentine's Day just being in the recent past. And I had asked Brian Brown to come on and talk about marriage in America today. I should have gone on and gotten some figures about how people spent Valentine's Day, the number of the money we spend on Valentine's Day. I can do it on my computer, but I'm afraid that thing's just going to blow. I have so much on here. How much do Americans spend on Valentine's Day? But joining me is Brian Brown. He is with the organization, National Organization for Marriage. Nation for Marriage is how you can find them online. And every year, the state at the federal capitol, they have a march for marriage. So, Brian Brown, thank you for joining me today. You're the president of the organization. But here I am looking at headlines. I have to tell you, the military has approved hormone therapy for Chelsea Manning. We know Chelsea as Bradley Manning, the WikiLeaks the soldier that was convicted of sending classified documents into anti-secrecy website WikiLeaks and is serving a 35 years prison sentence, eligible for parole in 7 years. I mean, you have to almost wonder, Brian, is this part of the new, what do they call that when you go undercover, witness protection program?
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that once you redefine what it means or attempt to redefine what it means to be a man and a woman, that this clearly is the next step. And I don't think people, at times we may not think deeply about what we're being asked to accept, especially on the issue of same-sex marriage. But what we're essentially being asked to accept is the very deconstruction of what it means to be mother and father, husband and wife, and what it means to be a human being. And once you go down this road of acting as if the biological reality of mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, doesn't matter, doesn't exist, then the next step is to say that the gender itself is a construct, and we're seeing that across the country already. The next step on quote-unquote transgender rights. And, people are seeing this more and more, and especially in laws like California, where students can pick what gender they are, go into the restroom, and parents are saying, what's going on? But this is all part and parcel of the attempt to deconstruct what it means to be a man and a woman, and the notion that it's not going to have profound consequences is just wrong. It is, and we're seeing them right now. We're seeing them across the country.
I don't know if you heard the beginning of the show, but in Iowa, we are now the third state in the nation with potential legislation to penalize a health professional who would offer assistance to someone struggling with gender identification.
Right.
I'm.
You're seeing this, in California, in New Jersey, and if you watch what's going on, it's essentially the same thing we're seeing in the marriage debate. Proponents of the redefinition of marriage don't want a free and open debate. They just want to shut down those of us that know the truth about marriage. The exact same thing is happening on gender identity. You have judges saying, well, we're not even going to allow any folks to stand forward and talk about the fact that they were helped by therapy. We're not going to allow that at all. They're going to be banned from the courtroom because we've already made our decision. And I think that's the key point, is what we're seeing is an attempt by proponents of the redefinition of marriage to shut down the debate by going to judges and having them make decisions for the whole country. And again, that strikes not only at the truth about marriage, it also strikes at the heart of what it means to be a constitutional republic. And for folks that think, well, this battle's lost or depressed, we don't have that option. We have an absolute obligation to stand up for the truth. The very nature of our country is at stake, and these are the times when it's difficult, where it's most important that you have bold voices standing up and proclaiming the truth, because this is not sort of the end of the line, as you just pointed to. There are many more next steps on religious liberty, on SOGI laws, on banning therapy, using the coercive power of the government to essentially repress, marginalize, and stigmatize those of us who know the truth about what it means to be a man or a woman.
And to dictate what business owners may or may not do with their businesses, and now to force taxpayers to fund, whether it's something in the military or whether it's whatever the case may be in the public schools, things that you don't agree with. It's totally changing the freedom, the ability of the First Amendment to express ourselves. So, Brian, we hear, and my first guest was Mario Diaz, who's written in a great article that same-sex marriage is not inevitable, that the numbers are not there. There's not a majority, not a strong majority supporting same-sex marriage. But I would say we do have an issue with our younger generation, and the politicians are somewhat, I think, cowardly, backing away from a strong stance on marriage because they're in fear of losing that next generation. So here you are, the president of Nation for Marriage. What do we do with that next generation? It's not marriage that's weak. It's our ability to defend it.
Well, I think that's true. I think that the biggest problem right now is that this change has happened so much from sort of the elites pushing this forward that if I or anyone else goes to a university campus and lays out our argument for the truth of marriage, I get so many students coming up to me and saying, well, I've never even heard that argument before. What I found is that there's only one side being presented often on these college campuses. And frankly, there's not enough of us out there willing to go sort of into the lion's den.
Yeah, it's not a friendly place to be, that's for sure.
Right. It takes a little bit of courage, but we have to ask ourselves, as Christians, who are we? Where do we come from? I mean, it's always been at times when things look bleak, where a few folks are willing to stand up, whether it's through evangelization, standing up against, for example, the evils that were occurring in the Roman Empire, being willing to stand against slavery. All of those times, things looked really bad, but a few folks being willing to stand up and make the argument makes all of the difference. And if we as parents, in whatever capacity that we're in, if we refuse to be cowed, if we refuse to be silenced, I've seen, again, this is often, one-on-one, this is often in college campuses. I've seen many students come up and say, I'm going to have to rethink what I thought before because I never heard the argument. So for me, there are really two things that are important. One is being willing to have the courage to go up and stand up for our beliefs wherever that may be. And secondly, we have to understand that, as Mario alluded to earlier, that in the taking public opinion right now with youth and acting as if that's always going to be the same, that's just wrong. We know that from the pro-life movement. We know that from a lot of social movements in history. We also know that as people grow up, they change their opinion. So to act as if the support for same-sex marriage in the under 30 crowd right now, that is the determinative of where we're going to be a generation from now or 10 years from now, that's just wrong. There was a time when people were saying, as far as communism goes, this is the wave of the future. You had drastic support for many of these states, and people saying there's no way the wall is going to fall. And surprisingly, we had leaders willing to stand up and look. History was changed. Communism was not the wave of the future. And in the same way, the pro-life movement continued to work. After Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court assumed that once it made its decision, the country was going to fall in line. And for a few short years, things looked pretty bleak. But from 1973 to the present, we've seen a radical transformation in what younger voters view, how they view the issue of life. We have, as Mario said, the most pro-life generation. So, frankly, it's up to us to get out there, to make the arguments, and to stand up, and not to accept the notion that the country has somehow embraced same-sex marriage. Polling on all of the ballot initiatives showed that the polls drastically underrepresented support for traditional marriage. In California, at one point, polling showed support for Proposition 8 at 36%. We ended up winning by 52.5%. So the polls have been notoriously unreliable. And look at what folks do rather than what they say. Proponents of same-sex marriage have entirely abandoned the democratic process. Instead, they're looking at the Supreme Court and federal courts to do their bidding. So if they actually believe that the country has embraced same-sex marriage, why are they working so hard to not allow the people to have a voice in this?
Right.
That is the most important fact that is really not disputable. The other side has made very clear they don't want any more ballot initiatives before the Supreme Court makes its decision. So, that sort of tells you a lot more than any biased poll where we stand. One other thing, there was a recent Associated Press GFC poll that only showed support for same-sex marriage at about, I think it was 48%. But one of the other things it showed was overwhelming majorities concerned about religious liberty, concerned about allowing folks to live their faith in the public square without being punished. So, the reality is that when we get our arguments out there, especially in the context of a statewide vote, we've had a tremendous record of winning. Only in the most liberal states have the people voted to redefine marriage, and only in a very few cases. It's 31 votes to 3. And for the last 2 years, the other side has entirely avoided going to the polls because, again, they are confident and they want to focus this on judges making the decision, not the people.
And so let's talk about that. And I probably should have asked Mario a little bit as well. Constitutionally, we have states who are amending their constitutions, going through the long, arduous process to amend a constitution. And then the courts are coming back and saying that's unconstitutional. If you've amended your constitution, that it's now in your constitution, how can they say that's unconstitutional? It's not a law. They've changed their constitution to include it, and now the courts say that's unconstitutional.
Well, it speaks to the upside down world, an argument that the other side is being made. Essentially, the argument now is that, and again, you don't have to think very deeply about it to see that this argument is wrong. Their argument is that with passage of the 14th Amendment in 1868, that the country got same-sex marriage within the United States Constitution. It's just no one knew it at the time.
Right.
And only now these elite, these judges have figured it out and are now going to impose it on us when we were wrong all along.
One of those unimagined, was it the Varnum case in Iowa? They called it an unimagined liberty. Is that what they called it? Unimagined?
Right. So what you end up doing is just completely rewriting and making up constitutional law. And because the judges want this to occur, they are willing to find within the U.S. Constitution something that clearly does not exist there.
And let's go back to that, because that 14th Amendment, you're right, they throw at us all the time when we do the bus tours on judges here in Iowa, which I've enjoyed you coming along and doing those tours. But that we hear the 14th Amendment, but here's the deal. First off, that would apply to the baby in the womb. That should apply life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to the American who hasn't yet taken their first breath, the baby in the womb. But that being the 14th Amendment, I don't have my Constitution right in front of me, but wasn't the 15th Amendment, which one was that? Slavery? And then the right to vote? The
14th, 15th, 16th Amendments, all of these deal with the aftermath of slavery. They don't. The attempt is made, especially you referred to Roe, to take the 14th Amendment and to reimagine it to somehow take away the right to life. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense, but we did have a Supreme Court ruling that went in that direction. The main argument for proponents of same-sex marriage is that equal protection and due process, both understood as a part of the 14th Amendment, somehow apply to the redefinition of marriage.
Right. But here's my point. The black individual in America didn't assume that it applied to them getting the right to vote. They knew they had to come right back and get another amendment to get the right to vote. They didn't assume that they were just included in that, but all of a sudden the same sex, nearly, a century later, we're supposed to believe same-sex marriage is included in that. And to go along with that, the female didn't assume that she had the right to vote simply because the white man had it, the black had to work for it, and then women had to fight for it on the 19th Amendment. Nowhere did they assume that they were covered in that 14th Amendment. So that's the fallacy that this other movement, the homosexual movement, is trying to say they're included in that. And along with that, I think that's a pretty good precedent. Why then doesn't the same-sex marriage group have to come forward with an amendment? Why is it that states are coming forward with a marriage amendment to protect what's always been? Why doesn't the other side have to get a new amendment to protect something brand new?
Well, unfortunately, it's because of the rethinking and undermining of the truth of the 14th Amendment through the courts. The reason that we've had to go and pass these state constitutional amendments, because initially a lot of the threats came from state Supreme Courts. And so the constitutional amendments on the state level protected against state Supreme Courts. Again, California is a good example. It stopped the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court had, again, reimagined their own California Constitution to say that same-sex marriage was now the law of the land. Through passage of Prop 8 and a constitutional amendment defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman, that was stopped at the state level. Then the other side move forward out of the state and to the federal government, making claims that the United States Constitution somehow creates same-sex marriage. And again, that goes against existing Supreme Court precedent. In 1973, the Supreme Court in Baker v. Nelson rejected this argument by saying that there was no federal question here. But unfortunately, a number of district courts have refused to abide by precedent, and that's why we're now headed to the Supreme Court. Luckily, we have one appeals court in the Sixth Circuit that actually made a good decision, and this set up a sort of classic circuit split where a number of circuits have claimed that the Constitution demands same-sex marriage. The Sixth Circuit said no, it doesn't, and that's why we're sort of on a fast track to the United States Supreme Court, with oral arguments going to happen at the end of April and a decision likely in June.
Which is why you've moved your marriage march.
Exactly. We typically have done the marches in June. We've fast-forwarded this year to have it occur on April 25th, which is Saturday. We want to get large numbers of folks in Washington, D.C. to stand together to say, we know what marriage is, the Supreme Court has no right to redefine it, and we want that to occur. And the reason we chose April 25th is that's going to be close to the date of oral arguments. We still don't know what the exact date will be. We may not know for a few weeks, but we do know that April 25th will be around the time of oral arguments, and we want to show the court all this talk that the people have abandoned the truth about marriage is wrong. We're going to stand together and be one voice in saying, don't undermine marriage and don't undermine our Republican form of government by thinking that you, as judges, have the right to redefine marriage. And that's why it's important, because this will probably this will be the last sort of public march we're able to have before we get a decision one way or the other from the Supreme Court.
And I can just say, having the honor of being there last year, it was a blast. It was a treat. It was fun. You know, you hear that young kids don't care about marriage. Brian, I tweeted out photos. There were young kids out there. Yeah. And then you see both political parties vying for the minority vote. I looked out there. I think if you remember, I don't know if I can do it right now. I said, "God bless America" in Spanish with the help of the friends who were out there, because there were so many individuals out there from the Hispanic community supporting marriage. I've heard them tell the head of the Republican Party, if you walk away on the social issues, you lose us. We have no reason to stand with you. We know in Illinois, it was the minority pastors who stopped the first push on same-sex marriage. The issue is not done. You're right. This is the last chance before the Supreme Court. You mentioned that Ruth Ginsburg was saying, are we ready yet? This would be a great way to show support that we are not ready. We will not embrace something that goes against God's word. We can't condone what he's condemned, and we will not undo our constitutional republic simply to satisfy the whims of a few.
I agree 100%. And again, the Supreme Court decision isn't the end of the line, just like it wasn't the end of the line on Roe. If we get a good decision from the Supreme Court, I can guarantee you that the other side will be going back to initiative and referenda to try and undermine marriage. Right now, it's going to be a difficult road to get a good decision from the Supreme Court. We need to do everything we can, and again, the march is a key part of that. If we lose, then what will have happened is we will have an illegitimate decision from the Supreme Court that is just as wrong as Roe was wrong. And we will have to build a movement that continues to stand and proclaim the truth. We will have to continue to stand for religious liberty, and we will have to do whatever we can, including a constitutional amendment defining marriage as the union of a man and a woman, which, by the way, is still a part of the Republican Party platform, even though we're seeing some weakness on the part of some Republican leaders on the marriage issue. It's a key part of what it means to be a Republican, to understand that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. And we're going to have to push for a constitutional amendment. And I have no illusions about how hard that's going to be, but I know that we have an obligation to do it. We have an obligation to work towards it. And it may be, a generation or two down the line, but this lie about what it means to be a human being cannot stand. It cannot stand. And just because the Supreme Court says it's so, it doesn't make it so. The Supreme Court has had horrible decisions in the past. Horrible decisions like the Dred Scott decision, Plessy v. Ferguson, the Fugitive Slave Act, the Roe v. Wade. Just because the Supreme Court said it was so, didn't make it so, and there was an obligation for people living in those times to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and to fight with every ounce of their being for the truth.
Brian Brown is my guest with nationformarriage. Are you .org?
.org.
.org, nationformarriage.org. The march will be April 25th. When was the last time you actually stood up to make a difference? What if you took your kids to see Washington, D.C. and to see the process? This isn't just about marriage. This is about upholding a constitutional republic and the whole process for which we amend our Constitution through the legislative process, not through the courts. They do not have the last word, nor should they have that power. You don't want 9 unelected, black-robed bandits, if you will, changing what has been historical throughout time for centuries, throughout countries, on wrong information. You want solid information, and I think Brian's right. We'll see something change in the future, should God allow, and should we be allowed to be speaking the truth. If they're not afraid of the truth, why are they afraid of the dialogue? I said that I would tell the story about David and Goliath. Do I have time, Ryan? Do I have time?
Oh, please.
Okay. When I was just recently in Israel, the Valley of Elah is one of my favorite places. It's off the beaten path. It's not a high tourist area. And the first time I was there, I happened upon the creek, and I was picking up these stones, and I was impressed with how smooth they were. And then I realized where I was. 5 small smooth stones. I was in the valley where David and Goliath had their battle. This year, Pastor Rob McCoy out of California, who ran for state assembly in California, gave a lesson. And he said, we hear about David and Goliath, and we think the story is about a young boy, a little guy beating up a big giant. But the story is so much more than that. We looked out over this vast valley and the hillsides to the north where the Israelites would have been. I think my directions are right. The hillside across the way where the Philistines would have been. And he said, here we are in this valley. God had given this to the Israelites. Why were they trembling in fear and allowing a Philistine in territory God had already given them? That's the question for all of us, Brian, whether it's in the educational institutions, whether it's in our homes, our churches, our Constitution. Why are we trembling in fear and allowing the enemy to come into the camp and take what has been ours, what has been founded on biblical principle and has been the truth? And we know, the Bible tells us, we know from history, when nations are righteous, the people rejoice, and when they are not, the people moan. We've seen it. And so why are we allowing the enemy in our camp? As Christian parents, as constitutionalists, why do we fear this? Why do we walk and tremble? Why don't we tell the truth? Stand up. Brian said it. We need more people going to college campuses. We need more people willing to stand up on the truth and say it in their workplaces. Say it now while we can. Stand on truth. Stand on solid information and quit quivering because a filthy Philistine walks in the camp when God's already given you the ground in which you stand. That's my point. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back. We won't be right back. This is the end of the show. Thanks for staying tuned. Next week, I'm working on my guest. I'm not exactly sure. I won't say yet, but it could be a really fun show. Someone who's taken on the government as well, if I can get him to come along. Thanks for being here. Be encouraged. Never be complacent.